Welcome to the Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions. This is our Sustainability Talk Series. My name is David Hart. I'm the director of the Mitchell Center. For those of you either here in the room or joining virtually that are here for the first time, the whole point of these talks, and in fact, the whole point of the Mitchell Center, is to grow our collective capacity to create a brighter future in and beyond Maine. Regardless of the particular topic, this one is going to be especially interesting. The talks explore how we can work together to address sustainability challenges. These are challenges that have a lot of moving parts. They require consideration of many complex and connected issues related to both the environment and the economy, to communities and cultures, and to the past, the present, and the future. If you've been watching the slides that went by earlier, you'll see that we've got a lot of great talks coming up for the rest of the semester. Next week is our own Tony Sutton, Tony, who will be talking about Wabanaki fisheries. This is going to be really great. I've heard Tony speak before. Really powerful work. And we have several talks later on in the semester, very different talks in one sense, but all at another sense about understanding and managing risks. In one case, managing risks from vector-borne disease, say tick-borne disease. One about risks associated with flooding, whether inland flooding or coastal flooding. And one about risks from the latest contaminant on the block, PFAS, these forever chemicals in Maine. So really interesting perspectives there, all about not just understanding problems, but doing the best we can to solve or minimize the risks of those. If you miss any of our talks, they're available later on our website. Just for those of you who are joining by Zoom, just want to give you a few guidelines. Please make sure your cameras are switched off and your microphones are muted. We aren't trying to do live questions via the Zoom. We'll do them instead. If you could put your questions into the chat. I'm very fortunate that my wonderful colleague, Linda Silka, a senior fellow in the Mitchell Center, is going to handle moderate that discussion by reading the stuff off and kind of summarizing where possible if there's a lot going on. I'll do the facilitation of the discussion and Q&A in the room. So I'm going to tag team it. Special thanks to Ruth Hallsworth in the back and Carol Hamill down the hall for all the help they provide right up to a couple seconds before we went live today to get this working. Today, we are very fortunate to have both Lucas Richman and Kate Dickerson with us to give a joint presentation on their collaboration to create a symphonic piece about climate change. Lucas is an award-winning composer and conductor, and Kate is the founder and director of the Maine Science Festival. Welcome, Kate. Welcome, Lucas.
There we go. Okay. In order for this collaboration story that Lucas is going to tell to make sense, you kind of need to know, I think, where it came from. So the Maine Science Festival is a celebration of the science that happens in Maine with events and activities for all ages. And these are just representative pictures of in the before times, so that's why no one's wearing a mask, of what you could see at the festival. One of the things that I like most about it is that it's all ages. So as you can see here, right, you've got about a 13 or 14-year-old at the same table as someone not 13 or 14, all trying to figure it out. The whole point of the Science Festival is to talk about the science that's happening in Maine and, well, first of all, how remarkable it is because we actually do have national and world leading scientists, but also to let people know what we have here in this state for science. This is a picture from one of my favorite events. It's called Science on Tap, where we go into a bar and we talk about adult conversations. If I remember right, this conversation was sex, drugs, and rock and roll. This had something to do with animals. I'm not really sure what, but it was a really good bit. And this is another thing. One of the secret sauces of the festival are forums where you take a deep dive into some science topic. And I like this picture for a bunch of reasons. Number one, it's a bunch of adults who look a little goofy. But number two, this was a forum, so it's not just sitting and listening to someone talk. This was about the voice and how we brought together a vocal coach and a mechanical engineering professor here from Maine who studies the vocal cords, and they talked about how your voice works. So if you're a singer, what you do with your body to make the voice work, and then the engineer was talking about how the vocal cords of the rest of your body work to make the sounds that you want to make as a musician. So we're really trying to bring in a different way to think about science. This leads into other events that we've had. One of the most important things for the festival, which started in 2015 and now runs for 5 days in the third week of March, is we have a very strong arts component. Part of that is because I've got 2 kids. One is a math kid and one is a theater kid, so I'm trying to make them both happy. But the actual real reason is because scientists can learn a lot from artists about how to learn to communicate. And artists are really good at questioning and trying to figure out how the world works. So they bring their own insights as well. So this was one of the coolest exhibits we did, and I think it's a good lead in. We had medical students from the University of New England. They had photographs from their anatomy class that they had made into more beautiful artworks, and they provided a curated exploration of their anatomy class to the general public to explain what they were learning in medical school, but also showing kind of the beauty of the body with it. So it was really interesting. That leads to what I'm going to pass off to Lucas to talk about, and that is the warming sea. The 3 things on here are kind of, this was the inspiration after many years of Brian Heinrichs and Lucas and I trying to say, how can we do more together? How can we do more arts and science? What can we do? And we're trying to find a collaboration. So in 2015, jumping ahead here, in 2015, I think it was 2015, Maine researchers figured out that the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than, I've heard, anywhere from 96 to 99% of the world's oceans. I think it's probably closer to 99, but either way, it's a lot, right? And that was coming up in 2019 when we really started talking about this. We're coming up on the bicentennial, which some of you might remember was another thing that happened in 2020. Kind of went by the wayside. And when combined with the idea and the researchers that we have at the Climate Change Institute here at the university, plus Bigelow Laboratory, plus a bunch of other researchers at the University of New England, some of the nonprofit organizations, the Land Trust, a lot of people are working on climate change and understand the science of climate change. But it hasn't worked, right? With talking about climate change in the science aspect hasn't worked. And here's some of my favorite examples that some of these we learned about while we did the research for this project. The woman up here, her name is Eunice Foote. She's one of my new favorite people. In 1856, she theorized that carbon dioxide would warm the atmosphere. Okay, 1856. An Irish gentleman in 1859 made the same hypothesis, and he was the one who got all the credit. So that's a whole other topic that we can get into, but she was there in 1856. Over here is Arias, I think is how you pronounce his name. I apologize for the mispronunciation. He actually did experiments that talked about carbon dioxide in particular. That was in 1896. So in 1896, there's actual lab experiments saying carbon dioxide is going to warm the atmosphere. And then we come to here, Guy Callender in 1938, the first published peer-reviewed paper showing definitively that the emissions from the Industrial Revolution are warming the atmosphere. And where are we at with figuring out climate change as a society? Not getting a whole lot, just based on science. So that led to me, and my background was in chemistry for an undergrad. I've known about climate change since we've talked about it as global warming, essentially my entire adult life, saying to Lucas, well, we've got the world's best researchers around. It's going to be Maine's bicentennial. Oh, and the Gulf of Maine is warming up faster than just about anywhere on Earth. How about you just write a piece about climate change, piece of cake? Maybe the arts can help us figure it out. And to his credit, Lucas said, sure. I think like most things, we say yes before we realize just how hard it's going to be. So we commissioned him to write The Warming Sea, which is what we're calling it. And then we had the problem of how do we get it so Lucas is going to be able to talk about this and to not to talk about it, but to understand it. So I set up conversations with all of these people for Lucas in the span of, I want to say it was about 4 months. Lucas went from 0 to 120 and really genuinely became, I would call more than a bachelor's degree expert on understanding climate change in the Gulf of Maine. And as a result of these conversations, really had a grounding in understanding what was happening in the Gulf. And before I pass it off to Lucas, I want to show you kind of his progression, and then he's going to talk about how he came about writing the piece.
The temperature in the Gulf of Maine is changing at a rate more than 99% of the global oceans. That's 99%. That's insane. I mean, we are like, sort of a hot spot.
Climate change isn't something that's happening out there or happening in the future. It's happening right here. It's happening right literally at our feet.
Yeah.
We can see in the bay what's happening.
Standing here today, you wouldn't know that we're in a spot that's going to be the shoreline in 30 years. It feels like we're in the middle of the woods.
Gosh, there's a massive grief process that needs to happen for human beings.
Right.
Not only that this is happening, but the idea that it's happened at our hand.
Because eventually we're going to end up having to move the fire station because it's right in the flood zone.
Oh, wow.
And you can't have that.
Obviously.
So, I mean, I've got a lot on my plate here.
Climate change at a macro level, there's sort of two camps, how to mitigate climate change and keep it from happening or slow it down. And there's adaptation.
They do whatever they need to do in order to get by, but fishermen, it's something, as my husband says, it's in my blood.
The Gulf of Maine has been warming in conjunction with a larger scale warming of the North Atlantic Ocean. So that will have a dramatic impact, and is already starting to have a dramatic impact on the aquatic life.
Just like if I were a lobster, to me it would be very stressful, chaotic, sort of frenetic, a little bit heart racing, and so because these are all really stressful conditions.
This little orb, it's spinning around, it's going around the sun. It has this tiny, tiny, thin little atmosphere around it, and we've messed with that chemistry, right? And so there's a lot to be thinking about what we're losing in all of that. And yet there are lots of people on the planet. There's an awful lot that we can do if enough of us decide to do it. And it doesn't have to be everybody, but we've got to do something. We've got to do things differently. Or is it too little too late? I hope not. But what other choice do we have?
But there are things that we can do.
And I'm going to pause there, that little tease of music, and pass the baton to the person who had the hardest job of all. So you should be set with just the arrows.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you all, and thank you to the Mitchell Center for having us. We're very appreciative. In the beginning of this journey, we actually had the opportunity to speak to Senator Mitchell about the project, and so it's very meaningful that we're here. In writing a creative piece, as Kate mentioned, so I said yes, and then comes what have I gotten myself into? Where does one start? How do you translate all this information? I learned more about plankton and copepods and coccolithophores and phytoplankton and nitrogen and all these different things, and the data of the temperatures in the Gulf. How does this translate into a creative art? At the same time, understanding that the purpose of this, as Kate mentioned, is perhaps to help get the message out in a different way that has not yet been successfully declaimed. The scientists are really good at doing what they do, but they're really not good at marketing, and especially good news, things that have been successful. I'm going to take a little straw poll right here as an example. Raise your hands, please, if you think that the ozone layer is in really bad shape. And now raise your hands if you think it's in good shape. Okay, so I consider myself to be a reasonably informed person, but I had no idea that the ozone layer is 75% healed from what it was in 1987. That's a good news story. And I would say a good half the world doesn't know it. In 1987, over 150 countries across the globe signed on to the Montreal Protocol to eliminate fluorocarbons. And that tells us a story of countries coming together, united, to make a decision that impacts our environment. And it was a success story. So we should know about it. What can we do, therefore, in continuing this journey on making sure that there's a reasonable climate for our children and our grandchildren? What can we do on a global level to activate everybody in the same way? It's fascinating to me when I was meeting with all these scientists, they all had their own idea about what climate change was and what was more important as well. As brilliant as they are, they haven't all come together to say this is what needs to be done, because everybody's an expert in their field, but there's not a uniting force at this point, not enough of one. So to the creative part, at first I realized, I thought I'm probably going to be collecting a lot of data, and I could present the data in a way that would be, if I decided that I wanted to have a children's choir and a women's chorus along with the orchestra. And I could have the children and the women vocalizing the data. That in itself, maybe that would be scary. Numbers and that sort of thing. But you know what? It doesn't necessarily do more than, once you get to that point of a little bit of fear, it doesn't evoke a healing response. And when, in addition to meeting with the scientists, one of the things that we did do was that we met with various middle school classes, because I wanted to get an idea of what they saw their future to be in terms of climate change. So I spoke about the piece, and Kate would always have, she would speak, or we'd have a scientist with us and talk about the work and how do you write a creative piece about climate change. And then I would ask the question, what would you want the takeaway from this piece to be for you? What would you want to feel by the end of the piece? And by and large, across the board, the word was hope. They wanted to feel hopeful. Now, many of these children have been impacted personally because they are children of fishermen. And I mean, we went to a lot of coastal communities, and they're seeing it firsthand how climate change is affecting their family. And they want to be hopeful. So that word in and of itself pointed me in a direction of, I need to tap some sort of emotional vein. All right, I'll put that aside for a second. I did have a chance to meet with Sean Burkle from the University of Maine, Maine State climatologist, and he gave me some incredible data while we were planning to celebrate the bicentennial of Maine. I thought, well, let's get the temperature readings of the Gulf of Maine for 200 years. So as you see, here are the years 1820 through through 2019. At the time, we didn't have the data from 2020 when I was writing the piece. And here are the measurements for the temperature of the Gulf of Maine. Now, it might not seem extraordinary, the range, but fractions, small fractions of a percentage point can have tremendous impact on the environment. You see in 1905, in the third column, about 7 down, 1905 is the lowest temperature. That's bolded at 45.32 degrees. And 2012 is the highest that we have at 52.664. So everything falls within a range between that. So it's really, you're talking about less than 10 degrees. You're talking about 7 degrees, essentially. But we're expecting that, so a shift globally of all the temperatures going up by even 1 point is going to be intense and tragic. All right, so what do I do with this? This is really cool. Then I thought, okay, well, perhaps I could take, I wanted to find out if temperature had pitch value, if you could assign notes to temperatures. Like, you know, when you hear a kettle boiling, that's a pitch. So are there variable pitches along the way? I spoke to several people and they said no, not specifically. So what I did is I broke down the high and the low, the 1905 to the 2012, and assigned fractions by 12, because there are 12, it's on the piano, if you look, you know, there are 12 notes before you get to the next octave. And assigned from the lowest note from a G flat, I'm actually basically calling middle C middle, I went down and up. And was able to assign a temperature to each of those pitches. It says G flat 1 because in the music lingo, that octave is called 1. If you look an octave higher, G flat 2 is an octave higher, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So C4 is actually middle C. So having assigned that, then we can see the various pitches that are assigned to the years. In 1865, the pitch is C7. And it was actually a high temperature year in the Gulf of Maine. It was 50.9. So C7 is towards higher in the treble range. You can look at any of these years and it's kind of astonishing. Kate mentioned 1938. If you scan down to the second to last of the third column, 1938, when the first paper on climate change was published, 1938, that's E flat 5. And it was a 49.136 in temperature. All right, so now I've got pitches, but what now? What am I going to do? I knew that I wanted to end the piece with a hopeful idea and somehow depict prior to that the rising temperatures that we're experiencing. And I also have a thought, 200 measures of the piece would represent the bicentennial. So there are 200 measures within the body of the piece that start from 1820 and go all the way through up until 2020. And each measure has one of these, the pitch that's assigned to it is the pitch that is predominantly fortifying that particular bar. So you hear the pitch of the year, the temperature in that year, that bar. That makes sense. So one of the things that in writing music that is daunting is the blank page. Like what do we do? I know for those of you who are visual artists or writers, you're staring at a blank page and you want to do something, but what? So I find it's always helpful if I create certain parameters that give me structure. So on an architectural level, for the piece, I knew that I was going to have an anthem at the end and the increasing temperatures of the piece before the anthem. But in terms of like the actual notes, how would I generate the notes? So for decades, I've used a very, very simple device. There are 7 letters in the musical alphabet, A through G. Oh, I haven't gotten there yet. I'll do that. I'll do that in a second. So when I mentioned the hope begins with hope, the idea. Right, I'll talk about the words. The anthem at the end was something where I realized I wanted the children to look out at the audience and talk to the audience and say something, like you put everybody on task, like and the idea of the hope begins with truth. We have to know what is the truth. We all have to accept that there are the issues with climate change. And we can't move forward without accepting that truth. So with the children saying, have you told them? Have you told your children the truth they need to know? Who better to send that message but the people who are the next generation? Things are changing. They must know that things will not remain as they were once long ago. Do you wonder? Have you filled their sails full of hope? Hope helps them soar. Tides are shifting, seas are warming. Up ahead, there's no turning back when there's no shore. Teach them that hope begins with truth. Tell them the truth they need to know. So give them hope and give them life. Hope begins with truth. That's the message from the children. I did also have the idea that I would have a women's chorus. And the women, I decided to cast in the mythological stance of the sirens. The sirens, as you know, the story with their beautiful song would lure sailors to the rocks and to their subsequent death. In this case, though, I changed the message of the sirens slightly into the fact that the sirens are climate change deniers. And with their message, if you listen to their message, you will be lured to the rocks. And this is their story. Hear our song and follow. Come join us on the shore where hope is dashed upon the rocks and truth is nevermore. Let yourself be carried by waves of false beliefs as skeletons of scientists are buried under reefs. I'm sure you love that one here. Deeply breathe our perfume of ignorance and lies. Taste with us the ashes of knowledge as it dies. Stay the course of ease with concern of only of now. Tomorrow's generations need not weigh upon your brow. You see the Greek language translation on the right. I decided that it would be, because it's a Greek myth, maybe these words should be translated into Greek. So the women will be singing in Greek. telling the story in a even more authentic sort of way. We've got a transliteration. They're not going to have to read the Greek. They're actually will be able to say akuse to traudimas kelastin actimazimas opu I elpida stuvrahus pano legitipa ke I alithia then tha irisi popa katsana. And that's the first verse. All right, so with that, kind of creating a certain parameters and a certain rhythm to the piece, I needed to assign pitches. And there's what I mentioned about the musical alphabet, A through G. I create a graph. It's very simple, where the next 7 letters follow under the A through G, and the next 7 letters and the next 5 letters. So then T from truth becomes an F, R is a D, U is a G, T is an F, and H is an A. And hope, the pitches assigned are A, B, and E. A kind of cool thing that I noticed in creating works of art, I always appreciate the synchronicities of things, and the idea of hope begins with truth. Literally, the word hope begins with the last letter of truth. So there is that elision. And those pitches, therefore, T-R-U-T-H and H-O-P-E. Da, 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 da. Have you told them? Have you told your children the truth? So if that's the children's song, what notes should the women's chorus sing? I thought they should sing perhaps the inversion of what the children are doing. So if you look at the way that the pattern of the notes, the children go down a minor third and then up a perfect fourth and down a major second. Da 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 dee da dee, an octave jump, ba da ba. So I have the sirens singing just the opposite, starting on the same pitch. And instead of going down a minor third, they go up a minor third and down a perfect fourth and up a major second. Da 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 da. And with that octave at the end, it suddenly created the sound of the sirens. Oh, oh, and it just kind of magically transformed and became what I needed them to be. It was very cool. So then putting this together, you'll notice it's kind of jumbled, but if you can see the first 6 notes in that, the lots of black stuff up there, that's a very fast rendering of da da dee da dee da dee da da dee da, the notes of the children sing. So I utilize that material, and sometimes I make it very compact, and sometimes I stretch it out. And on the 3rd measure, you'll see it says 1859. That's a significant year, because in 1859, that bar, 1859, is when the foghorn was introduced. So the event that happens in 1859, in the 1859 bar, is the foghorn. And you see that bom, bom, which is with the low brass and the contrabassoon and the cello and the basses and timpani and that sort of thing, creating that very, very low sound. 1938, if you see at the bottom there, that was the introduction of the first paper on climate change. And the events that take place, that's kind of a reckoning that happens right there with banging on metal plates and a lot of percussion and the brass fanfare sort of thing, while you see the octave in the lower part, in the second measure. I also want to just point out, let's just pick up that bar, 1938. And I'm going to go back a little bit, and I haven't checked this, and I hope I'm not going to tell a lie here. 1938, the pitch for 1938 is E flat. And in 1938, there is an E flat in the alto. And it actually is the E flat. Oh, sorry, the alto is the thing that doing the C. Sorry, my mistake. But there is an E flat. It's in the orchestration. I promise. It's not here, but I know it is there. Okay, so I'm not lying, but it's not there. But that E flat is there in 1938. So I wanted to show you. This is the piano vocal version, and I wanted to show you how I blew up that into the orchestration. These 6 measures that you're seeing, the 3 across the top and then 3 more. This is what the orchestra score looks like for those 6 measures. And you can see all that noodling happening. And then on the last 2 sections of the page, you can see the brass, the repeated bop, 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 bop. You see that gesture. That's what that is. And that's how it's translated into the larger bar. So each gesture has been really thought about, and the scientific information, how do I incorporate this into and tell this story so we finally get to the anthem. One of the more daunting things for me also was to get a semblance of how to create the sound of the ocean without using recordings or synthesizers and that sort of thing. So I brought an example of one of the instruments that will be used. And if you wouldn't mind, I'll speak up. If you wouldn't mind just closing your eyes for just 10 seconds and just listen. So what this is an ocean drum. And it has ball bearings in it. And we gradually tilt it . And you'll hear that in the first at least 3 minutes of the piece as we're getting into the warming sea. With the cancellation or the postponement of the original premiere, which was supposed to be in March of 2020, we wanted to do something. And through a lot of gracious efforts of people across the country, singers and instrumentalists all over the country, we were able to put a video together video recording of the last 4 minutes of The Warming Sea. The anthem, Hope Begins with Truth. And hopefully this will be it. And we just push play. Here are the 4 notes. Thank you. So there you have a little taste of what the warming sea is. And this is the way that the piece will actually end. That chord that you hear, the beginning of that anthem at the end, that is a horizontal amalgamation of the pitches that are used in the song. And it is a, we would leave it on a suspended kind of way because it's unresolved. So, Kate?
So then this is when it's going to happen. March 19th at 7 o'clock at the Collins Center. In addition to the world premiere of this piece, before that, we're gonna lay the groundwork. We're gonna have a panel of climate scientists and researchers talking about their current work now. We're gonna have a shorter version of what you just had here, what we've been calling in-house the Kate and Lucas show. And then a short film that shows how Lucas really learned. It'll be about 10 minutes that learned how he really learned to become an expert. The story about the Montreal Protocol that he told you, that was a 1.5 hour conversation that he and I had in the car one day, and me explaining to him what the Montreal Protocol was and him just being utterly disgusted at our lack of acumen at marketing a success story. Totally found it, totally worth it. And then we'll have the world premiere of this piece with the women's choir and the children's choir, with accompanied by visuals by who I consider a world-renowned digital artist, Chuck Carter. He's going to provide visuals to go along with the piece. And then the crux of the piece, not the crux of the piece, the final part of the evening is many of the people who Lucas spoke with are going to come on stage and join us and give us their reaction. Many of them haven't actually even seen that. Like we've all been waiting for this to come out and hear it. So they have no idea how their work has been translated into this piece. So we're going to ask them for their immediate reaction. And then most importantly, we're going to send people off with just a short example of, here are things you can do to start to address climate change and the climate crisis. We're going to ask our experts what they suggest, and we're going to send people off with a little piece of hope. And that's it. We would love to take questions. Oh, thank you. Hey, Linda.
Hey. That was so wonderful. That was just so interesting. Everybody, wherever you are in the universe watching this, can you clap even though it won't reach everybody? What a wonderful, wonderful, thoughtful, interesting presentation that gives all of us a lot to think about. So the idea of creating a symphonic piece about climate change and having it for the Maine Science Festival, just so interesting. And one of the things that you took us through is helping us, you didn't directly say this, but you did this so creatively, is different ways to think about science and bring in music and art and how that can be really, really helpful. And your process of writing this piece about climate change, the warming sea, really, really amazing. So you met with science people, Lucas, and what surprised you the most when you first started doing that? What made you think, wow, this is going to be interesting? Wow, this is going to be awful?
That's a great question, Linda. Thank you. Perhaps, well, Kate will tell you that for me, it was a big learning curve, and it really felt like I was in suddenly a master's program, a seminar on climatology or whatever. And I not only asked the students about what did they want the takeaway from the piece to be, but I asked the scientists, what do you feel about this? And for the most part, they were actually very hopeful. But the thing I did learn, which was, for me, sometimes when you know too much, you have to turn it off because it's overwhelming. But in the idea that through the process of what they're going through, I learned that we cannot get back what we've lost. And I think as a society, we think, oh, we'll fix things with climate change and then things will go back to the way they were. We're pretty much beyond that at this point. That the raging fires and the tornadoes and the extreme weather things that are happening, those will continue now. And what we have to do is do what we can to not make them worse. And the only way for us to not make them worse is we have to implement things now so the planet can heal. I'd like to cross-promote something which I've been sharing with a lot of people along this journey. There's a wonderful documentary called The Biggest Little Farm. And if you haven't seen this, I really suggest you watch it. It is about what on just a little speck of land, what two people did in forging a brilliant ecosystem that allowed Mother Nature to heal herself. And one of the scientists was telling me about the seaweed farms and the fact that you can heal and clean areas of the ocean. We can do this sort of thing. We just need to be set up to make this function properly.
Very, very interesting. Did you find sometimes in those meetings with the scientists, with the climate scientists, did you find yourself thinking, they're working on a different topic than I am, but there are real similarities between what they're doing and what I'm doing in terms of writing music? It's just in a different modality, or did you start thinking, whoa, these are just really different?
Well, they're all brilliant people. And I was always in awe of it. You know, when we go through our daily life and we do what we do, we're not always aware and thinking of what these scientists are doing on a regular basis in things in regions of the world and in regions of study that I would never even consider that one would endeavor in that task. The similarity for me was that they all seem to love the puzzle of the process. And I love puzzles, and when I write music, it is a puzzle. I will write a piece. It's kind of like putting together a puzzle where all the pieces, the picture is white and you don't know where things are supposed to go. But then once they snap into place, it's like, oh, that's what the picture is. And that's with the similarity with a lot of the scientists, I would say. So we had that in common. And they're very creative. They may say, oh, I'm glad you're doing this because I can't sing a note, but I love to listen. But they're very creative people.
One of the really exciting things about your work is you're bringing together science and music and helping us think about science, you know, in some new ways. A lot of what our courses are like, whether we're talking about middle school or high school or college, is separating things, is having, okay, here's the course that's on science, here's the course on da-da-da. Do you have any suggestions for us about how to think about maybe having courses or ways that we more commonly bring together different ways of seeing the world to help us maybe create some change?
Absolutely. There are schools or educational systems like the Waldorf School and Montessori where there is an integration and there's great success with the education that comes about that way. Years ago, when I was music director of the Knoxville Symphony, I went to an education town hall meeting, and they were about to cut out an entire instrumental program of an elementary school, and they were going to add another math class. I kind of took over the meeting, and I explained that in their 75-page doctrine of what the school system was about, the word music was mentioned once. And that the kids don't need another math class. Forgive me, all the scientists. They will appreciate the math and science and every other R and R, you know, the 3 R's, much better if they have the arts fully integrated. The arts have too long been called elective subjects. They are not electives. The arts are, in fact, what make us human. Without the arts, what are we? We're just, it's gray. And the arts bring color and shading so we can appreciate the subjects of history and math and literature. We can appreciate it in a very different fashion. If we've cut off that source of light, which is the art, the expression, the human expression, then we're basically disabling ourselves as a society.
Very, very interesting. One of the people in the audience has said, could Ivan Fernandez say a few things about what the Maine, what they're doing to make a difference and do some of these things?
The Maine Climate Council? Is that?
Yes.
I never turned down a chance for Ivan to explain his work. If he can jump on, that would be great. Otherwise, I'll do it for him.
There he is.
No, well, this has been a really wonderful hour, and I've heard about this for a couple of years now. You know, in the time that avails itself, probably the thing that most resonates with me is that what we've done here in Maine with the Climate Action Plan and Maine Won't Wait is all about hope. It's about having a plan to move forward, to celebrate all the things that we love about Maine and about the world that we live in. And I think this music is capturing that in a very profound way. So I would just leave it that it's, you know, as scientists, we talk about a lot of data that come across as doom and gloom. We need to make our decisions based on the facts. But this work that we've heard about today is all about hope. You know, I think we all can be proud of what Maine has been doing in the last couple of years to give us hope and to give us a plan for moving forward. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And Linda, I'm gonna just jump in really quickly. I'm glad Ivan mentioned that. One of our panelists is actually Cassandra Rose from the Maine Climate Council as that evening, and she's specifically there to talk about how Maine has been leading on this. So rather than me babbling for hours and hours about what the show is going to be, see me afterwards and I'll tell you. But Ivan's right. Maine has really led the way on this, and that's one of the things that we are trying to show.
Wonderful. David, did you have anything that you want to add? There are other questions I could, but I think we're nearly out of time.
Yeah, Linda, you've done a great job. And I think we are close to time about Cassie Rose. She gave a wonderful talk here. And if you guys want to know more about her and you can't wait till next month, go find her on our website. And I think the hope idea is really interesting, but also the complicated way that people are this strange mix of sort of rational things and emotion. And you've certainly done a great job of kind of helping us look at both and realize both are part of how we're going to find hope and what we're going to do with it. And even the Montreal Protocol is one example of where we've been able to get it right in the past. So let's give Lucas and Kate, a big round of applause. Thank you.